This was more than a standard royal appearance. It was, in effect, a hidden crowning. The photographers were instructed to not move, and the attendees were ordered to be quiet. The very atmosphere in the vast chamber felt suspended, as though the structure itself sensed the importance of the impending event. Princess Anne, having dedicated her whole existence to duty rather than acclaim, advanced with a composure that concealed decades of strain. Each footfall resonated with an odd definitiveness, signaling the conclusion of one age and the silent start of the next. Her hand, firm despite an age-related tremor, grasped not a golden diadem, but a symbol of inheritance. And as she faced Catherine, the significance of the moment was universally perceived before any words were uttered. This transcended obligation. It was, in effect, fate, shaped in quietude and presented with elegance. Ahead of our deeper analysis of this event's royal implications, ensure you subscribe to catch every future development. Nobody understood what made the occasion feel unique, or why Anne's face showed sadness instead of satisfaction. The media was informed it was an homage, a recognition concluding her decades of commitment. Still, all her language was heavy with symbolism, and each movement held implications missed by veteran royal reporters. Her tone wavered, not from frailty, but from the sheer gravity of history bearing down. She did not glance toward the king, nor Camilla, nor did she look at William. Her attention remained exclusively on Catherine, who appeared serene, collected, luminous, yet controlled. It seemed Anne perceived in her something beyond a future monarch, the very spirit of a dynasty desperate for guidance. The attendees, carefully selected and rigorously screened, remained perfectly still. Photographers were even directed to suppress their flashes, while behind shrouded curtains shadowy figures observed. These were recognizable shapes that desired anonymity but would not forego witnessing the event. A few claimed to see the king's form, static and inscrutable. Others insisted they identified William in the low light, his gaze fixed on his wife with an unidentifiable feeling. Yet the reality was more basic. They were all observing a conveyance of authority that could not be formally announced. Anne's address started elegantly, a meditation on obligation, commitment, and resilience. But her voice became weightier, her hesitations extended, and the remarks morphed into an unstated but unmistakable message. For each crown, there needs to be a spirit motivated by more than control, a voice that remains firm when others falter. Her sight shifted to Catherine as she raised the family's formal tiara, the one she herself had donned at her initial public investiture many years prior. Then, with measured gravity, she brought it down toward Catherine's inclined head. The crowd inhaled sharply, not in astonishment, but from the jolt of observing something that seemed prohibited. Shutters activated just before security personnel quickly stepped in, and the recordings were instantly restricted. In a brief instant, Catherine's eyes shone, and her mouth opened slightly in what could have been incredulity or acknowledgement. The interlude was short, yet everlasting. The quiet crowning of a woman selected not for her rank, but for her reliability. And following that, Anne uttered the phrase that would soon reverberate down palace hallways. "To you, Catherine, I commit the family's crown of honor." It was a statement basic in delivery yet profoundly impactful in its implication. The attendees breathed out, as though they had collectively held their respiration for ages. This was an affirmation of heritage, of command, and of belief in a time Anne understood she would not witness. Applause did not ensue, only the strange quiet of recognizing that an unchangeable event had transpired. Journalists eventually dubbed it the ceremony that halted time, an expression spoken with both awe and apprehension. This was because, uniquely, in recent history, the monarchy disregarded procedure
and instead acted on intuition. And when Anne's hand fell from Catherine's shoulder, her expression relaxed with reassurance. The mantle had been transferred, not by official order, but by personal dedication. However, under that calmness rested an undeniable fact. This was less a departure and more a profound judgment. But what motivated Princess Anne, the steadfast icon of service, to deliver her life's commitment into Catherine's keeping? The explanation started well before the event, within the fractures of a monarchy battling for its own existence. For many years, Princess Anne served as the royal family's quiet support system, never lamenting, never wavering. Amid each controversy, every hushed dispute, and all monarchical transitions, she remained resolute, her self-control intact. She did so even while the very bedrock surrounding her began to shake. But beneath that steadfast regimen existed something more profound, a silent weariness rarely perceived by others. Her close confidants revealed evenings when she sat solitary by the hearth, the burden of the monarchy heavy upon her, though the crown itself was not hers.
She was not merely assisting the institution, she was preserving its integrity, quietly mending its unraveling edges as others enjoyed its splendor. Nevertheless, even Anne, the perpetual icon of stamina, started to notice the fissures spreading past the point of mending. She was not concerned by authority. She was disturbed by disorder. The younger generation, originating from advantage but immersed in discord, appeared agitated, unsure, and occasionally perilously ill-equipped. William felt weighed down by anticipation. Harry had deserted his duties, and Catherine, positioned between heritage and modernity, was being tugged divergently. Anne observed them all with a blend of approval and apprehension, detecting the unavoidable change, a transformation that might either protect the monarchy's honor or completely destroy its facade. She recognized that the family had lost comprehension of allegiance in the way she understood it. Duty had evolved into a spectacle, and that spectacle had supplanted true meaning. Thus, discreetly and systematically, Anne started composing. Not addresses, not memoranda, but letters. These were personal messages, secured by hand, penned in the meticulous handwriting that implied obligation and careful thought. However, the correspondence was not directed to the king, nor to his successors. They were intended for Catherine, the woman Anne had previously regarded as merely an attractive ornament, but now perceived as significantly more. "You are the sole individual who hears without pursuing influence," one message stated, a line later reiterated in whispers by palace staff who always remembered it. This was not adulation, it was acknowledgement. Anne identified in Catherine the attributes long absent from the palace halls: modesty, silent fortitude, and a dedication disconnected from personal advancement. That correspondence evolved into Anne's admission, her heritage captured in writing. Within each sentence lay pieces of caution, encoded realities regarding the family's divisions, and clues about choices finalized but not yet voiced. They constituted instruction presented as anecdotes, and counsel veiled in fondness. And within them, Anne had mentioned her ultimate obligation, although her meaning was unclear to everyone at the time. Only Catherine, while reading, experienced the cold realization of prophecy, sensing Anne was readying her not for a position, but for a legacy of duty that must remain unannounced. Anne's strain was not derived from authority. It came from her prescience. She perceived what others declined to acknowledge: a monarchy split by self-importance, endangered not by external forces, but by its own members. She observed Charles's sovereignty constrict and break beneath the pressure of contemporary examination, knowing that if the crown lost its ability to inspire reverence, it would require a soul to maintain its cohesion. The establishment could only endure if an individual bore its essential emotional core. This understanding troubled her deeply, leading Anne to arrange her departure, not a withdrawal from rank, but a transfer of faith. Her intimate associates noted a slight shift in her last years. Her public engagements diminished, her voice softened, and her addresses carried a hint of valediction. Yet her quietness was not formed by surrender. It was formed by determination. She understood her period as the institution's protector was concluding, and another person needed to assume the burden of perseverance. She had selected Catherine far in advance of the public comprehending the reason. The letters represented her last gesture, blending defiance with loyalty, creating a link between an age of compliance and one of silent command. And while nobody beyond their immediate sphere would ever see them, their effect was already materializing in Catherine's decisions and in the fortitude she would shortly need to muster. But the load Anne bore originated not from the diadem, but from the disintegrating relationships surrounding it. And Catherine was soon to be challenged in a manner no monarch had previously faced. By the time Anne initiated her discreet withdrawal, the palace was already fractured. King Charles valued structure, Camilla valued sway, but Anne, she valued persistence, and she recognized that neither of them could shield the institution from its own nature. In private, authority was realigning. Every greeting, every meal, and all media updates conveyed a covert meaning. The monarchy, externally so serene, had transformed into a conflict zone of intentions. And as the king aimed to update the institution, the queen aimed to mold its public image, forcing Anne to defend something much more delicate, its spirit. Charles imagined a revived monarchy, smaller, more efficient, and practical. He desired a reduced number of salaried royals and a reduction in customs that suggested obsolete splendor. In his view, the time to come was defined by applicability. But Anne perceived the risk involved. She felt that eliminating ritual equated to eliminating respect. The institution's fortitude was not its effectiveness, but its longevity. And for Anne, persistence necessitated foundations, not transformation. Her conflicts with her brother remained subdued, yet unceasing, the type that filled each gathering with unvoiced strain. What Charles viewed as advancement, Anne viewed as decay. Where he pursued command, she anticipated disintegration. Following this came Camilla, elegant, appealing, and progressively powerful. An initial gentle diplomacy evolved into the intentional molding of the royal reputation. Her connections expanded, and her group of counselors started to exceed the king's group. Guest lists altered. sponsorships were reassigned, and gradually the atmosphere of royal matters started to bear her imprint. She was more than the queen consort. She was the institution's emerging representative in public opinion. And this frightened Anne. For decades, she had protected the establishment's core, its ethical guide. But Camilla, while capable, adhered to contemporary guidelines that prioritized influence above integrity. Trapped between these opposing forces was Catherine. Composed, tactful, yet growingly anxious. She respected Charles's agenda for change, but intuitively grasped Anne's cautions. And within that silent comprehension, Anne perceived her. An observer, not a plotter. A connector, not a danger. Consequently, Anne took an unforeseen step. She started tutoring Catherine secretly. The instruction was nuanced, nearly imperceptible to those not involved. Their meetings occurred not with pomp, but in hushed tones, privately, or during low-key events that appeared normal yet held deeper significance. Anne instructed her on the meaning of governing without official command, of leading via demeanor rather than dominance. This was the grooming of a future female head of the family. Yet the royal residences are full of listeners. Speculation started circulating about Anne preparing Catherine, of correspondence traded outside of standard procedures. Charles's assistants captured pieces of communication containing enigmatic language. The matriarch must ascend as the throne weakens. In a short time, an inside paper was exposed, a secret memorandum titled Anne's Matriarch Project. It supposedly detailed her discreet strategy to secure the monarchy's persistence via female leadership, an action that defied the king's established order. The note was disregarded as rumor, yet it propagated rapidly through all sections of the palace. And the most significant detail? Its reality was never refuted by anyone. Charles became fatigued, Camilla protective, and Catherine, the alleged covert matriarch, had to navigate a boundary so narrow that a single error might terminate her royal career. Each choice she implemented was examined, every statement she made evaluated against allegiances she had not sworn. Still, throughout the ordeal, Anne stayed serene, providing no refutation or justification. She recognized this behavior from the past. Monarchs engrossed in competition, while the actual dangers lurked quietly. In Anne's view, Catherine was not a competitor for control. She was the means of maintaining it. The hidden conflict intensified. Discussions grew frostier, and itineraries were altered to keep specific individuals apart. Inside the residence, harmony became a performance rather than a reality. But amidst all the discord, Catherine held on to Anne's guidance like a navigator. Survival hinges not on supremacy, but on persistence. While they battle for command, you must battle for continuation. And thus, as Charles and Camilla struggled for leverage, Catherine discreetly mastered the skill of unseen command, the type that requires no rank to govern affections. The process Anne initiated covertly was evolving into the institution's unstated means of survival. If Anne was indeed grooming Catherine privately, it implied a single conclusion. She foresaw the turmoil before others detected its approach. As the media fixated on Catherine's elegance, her attire, and her apparent easy poise, very few grasped the reality developing behind the imposing palace gates. Under the placid surface of photo opportunities and greetings, a clandestine tutelage was underway, one unrelated to allure and entirely focused on persistence. Princess Anne had been grooming her discreetly and fastidiously for a long time. This, however, was not instruction for formal events or widespread acclaim. It was a more profound bequest of regimen, quietude, and fortitude.
Anne was not molding a duchess. She was crafting a female leader. And Catherine, oblivious to the scale of her personal change, was gradually being maneuvered toward a fate that no official rank could adequately describe. Their instruction commenced in a nuanced, nearly imperceptible to those not involved. Anne's summons would appear without ceremony. Quiet meals at her property, secluded strolls at Balmoral, or extended late-evening telephone conversations. Every encounter held an objective veiled as simple discussion. Anne discussed monarchical history not with sentimentality, but as a strategic guide. She taught what to articulate when one's conscience objected, how to earn allegiance without requesting it, and how to guide without seeming to direct.
It was her so-called tapestry of continuity, a belief that the institution must never show instability, even if internally collapsing. Each generation, she informed Catherine, is required to integrate new resilience into that fabric or face the danger of it coming apart. Anne's teaching extended past conversation. She would allocate duties intended to challenge Catherine's determination. These included minor choices on philanthropic issues that delicately influenced the royal order, appeals to arbitrate between warring assistants, and directives to handle friction non-confrontationally. These actions were not arbitrary, they were practice sessions for command. Each one represented a precisely gauged test, instructing her daily to bear strain with calmness and to express authority via moderation. In quietude, Anne once advised her, the monarchy endures its tempests. Catherine paid attention, internalizing the cadence of Anne's insight and the hidden meaning beneath her serenity. However, this developing partnership was not unnoticed by all. William, who previously found solace in his wife's bond with his aunt, started to detect a more profound connection he couldn't completely grasp. He observed alterations in Catherine's vocabulary. Her replies grew more measured, her tolerance more acute. She started maneuvering through internal politics with silent accuracy, resolving issues before they escalated and soothing staff who had lost faith in the leadership. William respected this, but also felt apprehensive, as Catherine's developing self-assurance bore Anne's mark, implying his wife was being prepared for an influence he himself had not received. Yet Catherine never pursued it. Initially, she pushed back against Anne's mentorship, uncertain of the burden she was expected to bear. She did not view herself as a family leader or a designer of heritage. Her sole desire was to safeguard her relatives. But Anne, using her firm tone of silent authority, impressed upon her that shielding a family and maintaining a dynasty constituted the identical struggle. Gradually, Catherine acknowledged the reality she had sought to reject. Affection within the monarchy is delicate, whereas obligation is everlasting. When Anne's physical conditions started to decline and her public engagements lessened, Catherine's position intensified. Anne's growing non-appearance created a void the populace did not yet perceive, but which Anne did. It was during this quiet period, as formal guidance diminished, that Catherine's grooming entered its most critical stage. Choices previously rooted through high-ranking advisors started arriving directly to her. Her statements held increased significance in conferences she was not scheduled to join. Her attendance, formerly token, became essential. The household staff started relying on her intuitively, not due to orders, but based on confidence. And within the monarchy, confidence represented the most uncommon type of influence.
The dynamic Anne had fostered secretly was starting to mold the institution openly. Catherine had evolved into the silent pivot point upon which the disorder started to stabilize. And although she never mentioned it, she understood Anne's teachings were not rehearsals anymore, they were predictions. The institution was transforming, and she was positioned at the heart of its turbulence. Unwittingly, the mantle had already been bestowed upon her, not by statute, but by inheritance. Yet Anne's prediction was not concerned with direction, it was concerned with conservation. And upon the arrival of misfortune, the prediction started to materialize with relentless accuracy. The public perceived it merely as a medical concern, a short hospital stay, a careful announcement from the palace, and a calming picture issued to the media. But within those opulent confines, it was turmoil masked as serenity. King Charles's abrupt malady ripped apart the delicate equilibrium the family had desperately maintained. The sovereign who valued self-discipline was suddenly gone, and the void his absence created was more perilous than any medical finding. Lacking his firm, albeit controversial grip on control, the institution discovered it was without direction. And within the royal establishment, command is not offered, it is taken. Camilla advanced initially. She had been readying herself for this juncture for ages, though it remained an unspoken acknowledgement. Her impulse was to take charge, to radiate assurance, and to ensure the apparatus continued functioning. But in this effort she proceeded too quickly, authorizing public events that seemed insensitive, implementing procedures that estranged veteran staff, and rescheduling duties in a manner that appeared to marginalize specific relatives. In a matter of days, whispers escalated into overt discontent. High-level assistants confidentially labeled her management as reckless, a description previously unconnected to her. The media, perennially alert, started to detect the aroma of discord. News headings theorized, pundits agitated, and previous injuries within the family were exposed once more. The situation that started as a health concern had now become a fundamental crisis of trust.
Anne, restricted to her home owing to poor health, observed everything develop as if a prediction were being fulfilled. She had witnessed this previously. The silent collapses initiated by arrogance that conclude in widespread embarrassment. This instance, however, she declined to allow the family's disintegration to characterize its heritage. In her debilitated condition, she issued a last definitive directive. "Bring Catherine," she commanded via her personal secretary. The instruction bore the gravity of fate. This was not a matter of status or lineage, it was a matter of stability. Anne understood Catherine's training was finished, and the juncture she was prepared for was now present. As Catherine entered the turmoil, her very attendance altered the environment. She did not request command, she personified it. While Camilla concentrated on optics, Catherine concentrated on restoration. She discreetly contacted vital staff, re-establishing customary procedures that were hastily discarded. She advised William to stay composed, pressing him to avoid disputing choices openly and instead allow harmony to seem intact. In conferences with the household, she communicated with exactness, never blaming, always deliberate. Her demeanor brought to mind not a future queen, but a sovereign in essence. This was Anne's instruction, verbatim, being actualized. The change occurred instantaneously. In 7 days, the attitude of the press shifted. Where doubt previously existed, respect now flourished. Catherine, the serenity in the crisis, one newspaper announced. Others named her the steadying core of a disturbed monarchy. Even inside the residence, experienced administrators started seeking her direction. It was nuanced, yet irrefutable. Control had been transferred. What formerly was Anne's discreet plan had currently become Catherine's apparent actuality. And though Camilla stayed externally poised, she could sense the momentum changing, not with hostility, but with certainty. The institution, whether by intuition or destiny, had rediscovered its ethical core. Anne was informed of Catherine's accomplishment several days afterward. She reviewed the report quietly, her expression inscrutable to observers. But internally, she experienced a sensation approaching reassurance. Her ultimate examination had been completed successfully. Catherine had remained firm where others could have stumbled, supported not by authority, but by objective. The lineage she safeguarded her whole existence now possessed a new protector, one shaped not by aspiration, but by tenacity. Thus, disguised as a departure event, Anne arranged a crowning that nobody ventured to identify. It transpired in quietude. No fanfares, no elaborate parade, just two women and a single heritage. The great hall was quiet, the atmosphere thick with a history that felt alive within the structure. As Princess Anne lifted the formal tiara, the instant expanded past ritual and into fate. Catherine's eyes shone, not from victory, but from silent apprehension, as she understood this was no mere motion, but a conveyance of essence, a secret crowning of the soul. She was not receiving acclamation, she was receiving a profound responsibility. And in the quiet, Anne's shaking hands bestowed upon her an object much weightier than metal, the burden of the family's continuation. Anne talked gently, her tone firm, yet coated with emotion that years of control could not suppress. "To serve," she started, "is to capitulate. To guide, one must hear the quiet gaps in language, the distress behind the obligation." The phrases seemed basic, yet they reflected the oaths of an actual crowning, a pledge to exist not superior to, but inside the establishment that shapes and consumes its servants. Catherine inclined her head, her face tranquil, but her heart pounded internally. The understanding hit her. This was not just an homage, this was inheritance, concealed openly. The leader's burden had been transferred, not by sovereign edict, but by trust and understanding. Catherine remained silent. She was unable to talk. Her acknowledgment was unspoken, an inclination of the head. A lone tear she battled to hold back. This was not frailty. It was the instant when all the training, every message, every word Anne had murmured to her solidified into a single fact. She was not just the spouse of the heir anymore. She was the institution's ethical core, the mooring in an ocean of perpetual change. After that point, even the manner in which personnel spoke to her altered, slightly and deferentially. The very atmosphere seemed to shift uniquely upon her arrival into a space. Yet the populace beyond that sanctified group was agitated. The small number of reporters in attendance perceived a momentary event, although none could articulate it. The images recorded the motion, but failed to capture its significance. Was the act symbolic, ritualistic, or something significantly more profound? The residents provided no clarification. Each question received a placid, practiced refutation of honor, yet nobody found it credible. The ambiguity itself provided sustenance for conjecture. News headings propagated internationally. Princess Anne's enigmatic action. Did the monarchy anoint its successor? The Queen's non-appearance was certainly observed. Uniquely in recent history, a royal function of this magnitude transpired lacking her attendance, and that quietness communicated more forcefully than any announcement might. Pundits argued about her omission. Was it endorsement veiled by remoteness, or disagreement enveloped in prudence? Nobody was certain, but those inside the palace confines comprehended the reality. The Queen's non-attendance served as Anne's authorization. It represented the tacit admission that one age was diminishing and a new one had commenced. Privately, counselors hurried to manage the story. Had Catherine become a joint leader in training? Was Anne's action a violation of procedure? The disorder merely amplified the event's potency, as the intended secret had already permeated public awareness, changing into a force that the king and his staff could not reverse. It was a crowning devoid of ritual, an inheritance without announcement, and it was perceived by all. Anne, observing Catherine's stable demeanor during the maelstrom of conjecture, at last realized what she had always desired. She saw the fortitude to persist without justification, and the elegance to guide without demanding. In Catherine, she witnessed the embodiment of all she had worked to protect, the institution's silent core pulsing under ages of clamor. And when she averted her gaze, her expression eased with both reassurance and sadness. She had fulfilled her role. Her obligation was finished. Yet the event was not a conclusion, it was a caution. Because wherever new authority emerges, darkness invariably waits to seize it back. In a short time, the murmurs started. Matriarch Catherine, Anne's selected successor, the king's quiet. These phrases drifted through the residence like fumes, unseen yet stifling. Each hallway in Buckingham Palace buzzed with conjecture. Every discussion quieted instantly when her name was uttered. The event intended to signify persistence was now analyzed as a covert overthrow. Nobody was sure if Catherine had been elevated or trapped. But a single fact was absolute. Life within those confines would never return to how it was. Allegiance, previously the vital essence of the establishment, shattered instantly. The personnel divided into opposing groups. One faction comprised Anne's supporters, the traditionalists who valued regimen, order, and ethical fortitude. They viewed Catherine as the logical inheritor of Anne's subtle domain of control. The opposing side included Camilla's confederates, social strategists aware that perception equaled power, and Catherine's expanding popular esteem was a clear menace to their dominance. Between these groups stood an institution disintegrating beneath its own confidentiality. The friction was not overt, it was deadly. William also discovered he was caught in the conflict. He respected his wife's elegance and her capacity to foster harmony where others caused division. But under his approval lurked anxiety. The media had started naming her the woman who stabilized the monarchy. A few news headings ventured further, suggesting a female-governed institution, a concept that simultaneously thrilled and alarmed the establishment. William questioned if Anne's guidance had exceeded its bounds, if his wife had received not only the leader's insight, but also her determination to command. He adored her, yet he was apprehensive about the implications of her ascending influence on his own prospective position. Then the unauthorized disclosure occurred. Late-evening electronic messages spread among household staff, alluding to what one assistant termed a power realignment in royal authority. Another message detailed Catherine's expanding control over media tactics and internal updates, choices normally allocated to high-ranking royal counselors. The breach extended outside the residence in a matter of hours. Journals emblazoned the phrase "palace in turmoil" over their main pages. Sources within whispered that Catherine had discreetly assumed control of the public's confidence, regardless of whether she had been given authorization. After Charles regained his health and resumed public duties, the strain was evident even in images. His exchanges with Catherine, formerly affectionate and paternal, became controlled, courteous, yet remote. The monarch, prioritizing structure over all else, now confronted a difficult truth. The populace cherished the individual, embodying the exact transformation he dreaded. Camilla, detecting the danger, acted swiftly to regain dominance, scheduling appearances that positioned her next to the king at all significant functions. However, the damage was already inflicted. The picture of Catherine beside Anne, serene, noble, and resolute, was etched into the country's collective mind. The general feeling of the populace was irrefutable. Surveys showed soaring approval for Catherine. Analysts lauded her as the silent fortitude supporting the institution, while others acclaimed her as the monarchy's path forward. Beyond the palace entrances, groups held signs displaying her name. An event that started as a representative gesture of inheritance had transformed into a popular crowning of confidence.
Each motion she performed, every phrase she articulated, was now assessed not as a princess's, but as a future sovereign's. Within the residence, conversely, respect contorted into apprehension. High-level staff worried that Catherine's ascent, though inadvertent, had produced an instability that nobody understood how to handle. They were concerned that the institution's narrative, previously firmly managed, had fallen into the grasp of the populace. Unprecedentedly, the monarchy's story was not authored inside the residence, but by individuals external to it. Catherine's quietness merely intensified the enigma. She did not validate or refute her new position, permitting the legend of the matriarch to expand independently. Consequently, the institution, once restricted by procedure, now found itself at an intersection, drawn between two hubs of authority, the established and the unavoidable future. Catherine had not pursued the mantle Anne bestowed, but fate possesses a method of requiring what others are afraid to accept. And as the institution contended with its altered equilibrium of control, Catherine's subsequent action would determine if she would be the monarchy's rescuer or its quiet downfall. She did not address the public from a balcony or provide a formal oration. Her initial directive arrived discreetly, in a message distributed to all royal residences. We must present a united front. 6 words, plain, refined, non-confrontational, yet they concealed the most profound singular change the institution had seen in recent history. Underpinning its message of cohesion was a realignment of authority so nuanced and intentional that few perceived the event until after its completion. In a short period, the palace apparatus started to realign. Conferences were moved, sections were reorganized, and established orders were dismantled without notice. And at the core of this quiet uprising was Catherine, the individual previously misjudged as merely compliant, now occupying Anne's position not as an inheritor, but as her spiritual replacement. Her initial action was to impose structure upon the disorder Anne had long cautioned her against. The residence, swollen with competing controls, had been plagued by subdued conflict and fractured allegiances. Catherine commenced by breaking down what she termed the interference. Staff members who flourished on rumor and association with authority were suddenly terminated or relocated. Their successors were meticulously selected, valued not for compliance, but for prudence. Information pathways, previously split among rival departments, were consolidated beneath one guiding principle: lucidity, objective, and allegiance. This was not an elimination of insurgency, it was the reinstatement of order. However, for individuals who profited from the disarray and competition, it seemed like an overthrow conducted with gentle exactness. Camilla's confederates were the initial ones to notice the cold shift. For a long time, her associates had molded stories, disclosing preferred accounts to amicable reporters and guiding focus through nuanced methods. But Catherine's discreet intercession severed those connections. Press disclosures diminished, internal papers were monitored, and personnel who previously functioned without supervision had their privileges cancelled. Upon being interrogated by high-level assistants regarding these abrupt alterations, Catherine's reply was controlled but resolute. Structure commences with integrity. This statement would grow to symbolize her new governance, one that required honesty without performance. Next occurred the action that captured global attention. Her initial independent appearance, without William, the king, or the queen consort. Externally, it was a mission of empathy, yet its underlying meaning was clear. Catherine was not merely a prolongation of another's command, she was autonomous. Photographers recorded her silent assurance, the placid firmness in her voice, and the manner she discussed matters of cohesion and duty, never referencing rank. The media, eager for symbolic meaning, bestowed upon her a new designation: the monarchy's true navigator. It exceeded being a moniker, it was an affirmation. Away from the news headings, a deeply private event transpired. Anne made a request for a confidential discussion. The two women convened for an extended period. No counselors, no assistants, no facade. Observers who saw them subsequently noted Catherine's eyes were tearful, yet determined. Regardless of the conversation exchanged that day, it signified the genuine fulfillment of Anne's prediction. The mantle was transferred, not via ritual, but through shared understanding between two individuals linked not by status, but by persistence. Anne perceived in her protégé the evidence that her enduring protection of the institution had been worthwhile. Catherine, meanwhile, felt both gratefulness and sorrow. She understood at this point that command was not a prize, it was a weight. As Anne made her ultimate withdrawal from public activity, no announcements or goodbyes were issued. She vanished just as she had existed, compliantly and without fanfare.
Catherine's following action was to guarantee her guide's heritage was respected, not in rhetoric, but in deeds. She upheld Anne's creed of silent fortitude, guiding the institution away from clamor and toward equilibrium. Yet, as she did this, a fresh weight descended on her, the awareness that, henceforth, each choice, every quiet moment, and all errors would shape not only her own heritage, but also the time to come that Anne had committed to her. But in Anne's view, it was not a departure, it was belief. She had given Catherine the time ahead, and the family's continuation now rested on her capacity to manage it. When the residence's gates opened again to the populace, Catherine stood solitary, not as a monarch, but as something significantly more lasting. In her past, Anne's age had concluded with the elegance of someone aware her objective was fulfilled. Ahead of her lay a broken institution, urgently needing restoration. The leader's mantle, now sitting on Catherine's soul, was imperceptible visually, but undeniable in its presence. The public detected it, the residents perceived it, and even her previous skeptics now yielded to the silent authority lacking formal rank, ritual, or decree. And as Anne's last acknowledgment dissolved into quiet, the reality descended upon the nation like an epiphany. The seat of power might be occupied by kings, but the institution endures because of its queens. Catherine's ascent was not clamorous or coerced, it was stable, a type of fortitude that no edict could create. Her initial period as the new leader progressed like a careful equilibrium between respect for tradition and modernization. She restored procedure where disorder had infiltrated, yet she substituted inflexibility with compassion. The public perception of the royal family started to shift beneath her meticulous supervision, evolving from a lineage holding on to past control to one finding its compassion again. Her tone, serene yet resolute, turned into the institution's mooring in a society increasingly dubious of royalty and rank. She was guiding not via command, but via genuineness, an instruction Anne had etched into her being long before the public observed. Anne's withdrawal from service was anticipated, yet its implementation was perfect. One day, a brief announcement was issued. Her Royal Highness Princess Anne will recede from public obligations permanently. No media briefing occurred, no departure ceremony, only quiet, as though she had dissolved into the very history she had long safeguarded. Her intimate associates mentioned she left a secured message, directed solely to Catherine, labeled, "For when quietude becomes more burdensome than obligation." Its substance was not disclosed, but in the subsequent time, Catherine's bearing intensified. Her serenity grew more contemplative, her choices more deliberate. It seemed as if Anne's ultimate instruction had been conveyed to her without language. Beneath Catherine's guidance, the institution regained its stability, procedures eased, and philanthropic efforts broadened past ritual into genuine engagement. Uniquely in recent times, the royal reputation was characterized not by controversy or conjecture, but by equilibrium. The media, previously fractured in its allegiances, began to unite around a single story: Catherine, the crown's new matriarch. The expression became popular worldwide. Commentators dubbed her the spirit of the household, while others equated her impact to sovereigns of bygone eras who restored realms not by coercion, but by compassion. Even the king, previously cautious of her expanding presence, started to depend on her intuition. She had transformed into Anne's vision, the silent governor behind the royal curtain, maintaining cohesion without ever seeking acknowledgement. And still, under the victory, a persistent reality remained. Authority, regardless of how delicately handled, involves a price. Catherine frequently found herself recalling Anne's statements, understanding that command is gauged not by acclaim, but by self-denial. She perceived it in William's exhausted gaze, in the delicate truce between relatives, and in the unvoiced strain of serving as the ethical core within a structure founded on rank.
The greater her achievements, the more profound the quietness surrounding her became. Eternally in the shadow of those you safeguard. The public labeled it a fresh beginning, the Matriarch age, a period characterized not by sovereign decrees, but by sentimental influence, tenacity, and silent control. Yet just as brightness revisited the institution's reputation, tempests assembled just out of view. The media, perennially ravenous, started to theorize about inheritance, about age-based divisions, and about the fluctuating allegiances that invariably accompany authority. The identical murmurs that previously enveloped Anne were reappearing, only this time they encompassed Catherine. Nonetheless, she remained resolute, just as Anne instructed, with elegance, with moderation, and with the serenity of one who understood that diadems might shine, but true power is wielded in quietude. And thus began a different sovereignty, not of monarchs, but of the women who sustained the institution when the physical crown had started to weaken.